Imagine being pulled from a burning building, like just gasping for air. And before you can even really catch your breath, your rescuer just hands you a blueprint for a completely new civilization.
Right, which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Well, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Before we even jump in today, I just want to take a quick moment to speak directly to you, the listener.
Absolutely.
May God bless your day today, and may God bless your entire week ahead. It is so fantastic to have you here with us. We have an absolutely incredible journey for you today, taking us back, thousands of years.
Yeah, thousands.
We are digging deep into the 20th chapter of Exodus, and we're drawing on some really remarkable historical and linguistic insights from the Holman and NAA Study Bibles.
Some really great sources today.
Yeah, they are. And our mission today is to look right past all of our modern kind of pop culture familiarity with what we typically call the Ten Commandments.
Right, because we all think we know them.
Exactly. You see them on monuments, you hear them referenced in movies, but we want to rediscover them as they originally were. Like a radical, completely disruptive ancient treaty that entirely redefined human relationships with the divine, and honestly, with each other.
Yeah, and setting that historical context is just so crucial because when we just say the Ten Commandments, we subconsciously bring all of our modern Western legal baggage to the table.
Oh, for sure. We picture a courtroom or, I don't know, a list of city ordinances.
Right, exactly. But the sources we're looking at today point out something critical right from the start. In the original Hebrew, these aren't actually called the Ten Commandments.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they're actually called the 10 Words, or the Decalogue. And these 10 words formed the foundational principles for a newly liberated people who, frankly, had zero experience being free.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if they are the 10 words, that completely shifts the tone of the entire text. I mean, these aren't just arbitrary rules dropped out of the sky by an angry deity to ruin everyone's fun.
No, not at all.
We have to look at how they are presented and, more importantly, the identity of the person giving them.
Yeah, and to do that, we really have to look at the preamble. Exodus 20 begins with a very specific, deliberate introduction. God identifies himself by saying, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." Now, to an ancient listener, this wasn't just, a casual greeting. This mirrors the exact structure of an ancient Near Eastern treaty, specifically a suzerain vassal treaty.
Okay, wait, hold on. I want to make sure I understand this structure. So you were saying this is essentially formatted like a formal royal document from the Bronze Age.
It absolutely is. In these ancient documents, the great king, the suzerain, would always begin with a preamble of self-identification.
Okay.
And that was followed immediately by a historical prologue outlining what he had done for the people. By stating, "I brought you out of the land of Egypt," his saving act, like literally liberating the Israelites from generations of brutal slavery. That becomes the core of his identity in this new relationship. It's the very thing the people are supposed to remember whenever his name is mentioned. And because God is acting as the ultimate king and lawgiver here, well, Israel's entire legal system becomes utterly unique in the ancient world.
That makes so much sense, because if God is the king, then breaking a law isn't just a civil offense or a crime against the state.
Right.
You aren't just getting a speeding ticket from a local magistrate. It becomes a direct personal offense against the divine authority himself.
Yeah.
And I was reading in our notes about the actual language used here, like the Hebrew grammar. It's not phrased like standard legal code, is it?
It's really not. Standard legal code usually reads as casuistic law.
Which means?
Meaning, if you do X, then the penalty is Y. But the Hebrew used here for these negative commands takes a very particular grammatical form. It combines the emphatic negative particle, lo, with an imperfect verb.
So how does it translate for us?
It translates roughly to an emphatic never, like never do this. It is a linguistic structure that was used specifically by a superior addressing an inferior. It's not a negotiation. It's a definitive boundary set by the ultimate authority.
So it really does bring us back to that firefighter analogy from earlier. It is like a firefighter pulling you from a burning building, throwing you over their shoulder, carrying you to safety, and then handing you the fire safety manual.
Exactly.
The rescue comes first and the rules follow. But how does that foundation of liberation change how the Israelites standing at the base of that mountain would have perceived these incredibly strict laws?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, The obedience to these laws was never meant to be a prerequisite for being saved. They were already saved.
Right, they were already pulled from the burning building.
Exactly. Obedience was seen as the vehicle to enjoy and maintain the freedom of this new covenant. I mean, they had spent 400 years acting like slaves in an empire of death.
400 years.
Yeah. So these 10 words were the instructions on how to live out their new identity as a free people.
Wow. Okay, so because this God is a rescuer, he demands a completely different kind of allegiance than the empires around them. And I guess that leads us to the first massive disruption of ancient culture in this treaty, the strict prohibition of making images of God.
This is a monumental paradigm shift for human history. I mean, the Egyptian and Canaanite gods, the deities the Israelites were entirely surrounded by for centuries. They were constantly associated with aspects of the physical creation.
Like nature and stuff.
Right. They were tied to the sun, the river, the fertility of the soil, the storms, and they were worshipped through physical objects, statues, and totems that represented those elements.
Which means the plagues in Egypt weren't just random magic tricks. They were essentially a systematic demonstration of supremacy over those exact earthly elements. Like God turning the Nile to blood or blotting out the sun was proving he was superior to the gods associated with those specific things.
That is the precise theological point of the plagues. God proved he has absolute power over all aspects of creation because he is entirely separate from it.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, to make an image of God, to try and carve him out of wood or stone or, cast him in gold, is to limit him. The sources explain that reducing the creator of the universe to a physical object is actually an act of aversion and disloyalty. It's an affront to his true, transcendent nature.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text goes on to describe God as a jealous God in relation to those idols. And I mean, I have to push back on that word a little bit. Sure. When we hear jealous today, we think of a toxic human trait. We think of a middle schooler upset that their friend is sitting with someone else at lunch.
Right.
It implies insecurity or petty rivalry.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to fit the context of this massive cosmic rescuer.
No, it doesn't. The modern English connotation of jealousy definitely falls short here. The jealousy described in Exodus is much deeper and entirely rooted in the concept of exclusive covenant.
The analogy I keep coming back to is that it's less like a petty rivalry and more like the fierce protective integrity of a marriage.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, like you wouldn't want your spouse to share their deepest vows and intimacy with someone else, not because you are petty, but because that betrays and destroys the unique covenant of the relationship. God's jealousy is about protecting the integrity of the rescue mission.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. And the text underscores the weight of this relationship by warning that God visits the iniquity of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate him.
Which sounds incredibly harsh at first glance.
It does, but you have to look at the historical context. In the ancient Near East, extended families, so grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren, they often lived together in the same immediate tent cluster or household.
Oh, okay, so they're all right there.
Right. This reflects the sociological reality that deeply immoral, idolatrous behavior from a patriarch infects and brings suffering to the entire living household. It creates a localized cycle of sin.
But the contrast there is staggering. 3 to 4 generations of consequences, which, like you said, is basically just the natural lifespan of a single household living together. But what does the text say about his mercy?
It says, he shows mercy to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments.
1,000 generations. I mean, that is practically eternity in human terms.
Exactly. The mathematical disparity is the entire point. It completely shifts our understanding of this jealous God. His capacity and desire for mercy exponentially outweigh his judgment.
Why?
The cycle of suffering in those 3 to 4 generations can be broken, and his loyal, enduring love is the defining, overarching characteristic of his covenant.
And that leads right into the commandment about taking the Lord's name in vain.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people grew up thinking this just meant you shouldn't use God's name as a casual curse word when you stub your toe.
Yeah, that's a very common misconception.
But the study Bibles point out it is way more serious than a slip of the tongue.
Far more serious. The Hebrew concept of name carries the weight of a person's character and authority. Taking the Lord's name in vain is specifically tied to swearing false oaths or acting irreverently in a way that misrepresents who God is.
Okay, so it's about representation.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you claim to be one of his rescued people, but you act with cruelty, exploitation, or deceit, you are distorting his character to the surrounding nations. You are wearing his uniform while committing a crime, and essentially you are disconnecting yourself from his saving acts.
Okay, so up to this point, we've established this exclusive, imageless, deeply reverent relationship with the divine. It's a vertical relationship, heaven to earth.
Right.
But then the treaty takes a massive pivot. It radically shifts its focus horizontally to how these newly freed humans are supposed to treat one another. And it starts with something that, frankly, blew my mind. The literal invention of the weekend, like mandated rest.
The Sabbath. The word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew verb shabbath, which literally translates to cease, to stop working.
Just stop.
Yes, just stop. And the sources point out that this is rooted in the imitation of God's rest at creation. In 6 days God created, and on the seventh, he ceased. The Israelites are being told to mimic the very rhythm of the cosmos itself.
So what does this all mean for an ancient civilization? Like, think about their immediate context. They had just spent generations in Egypt, an empire built on the blood and sweat of endless, unbroken slave labor.
Yeah, making mud bricks 7 days a week.
Exactly. Production was their only value. And here, the commandment isn't just a suggestion to take a nap if you feel tired. It is aimed directly at the adults of the community who held the power.
The text is exceptionally explicit about who must participate. It says that you, your son and daughter, your male and female servants, your livestock, and the foreigner residing within your towns must not do any work.
You're telling me the rich and powerful in this ancient society were legally mandated by the creator of the universe to give their lowest, most vulnerable servants a day off. That is incredible. Think about how utterly alien and disruptive this must have sounded. God is looking at a traumatized, overworked people and saying, halt production. You are not machines. Your servants are not machines. Even your ox deserves a break.
It was a weekly, physical, bodily reminder of their own liberation from Egyptian slavery. It forcefully leveled the playing field every 7 days. A master and a servant were completely equal in their rest before God.
That's beautiful.
It is, arguably, the world's first universal labor law, functioning as a complete rejection of the Egyptian economic system.
That is brilliant. Now, right after the Sabbath reorients their time, we get into the structure of the family, honoring your father and mother. And the notes point out this is the only command with a specific promise attached to it, right? So that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you.
Yes. And honoring parents in this context wasn't just about, being polite or sending a nice card on their birthday. It was vital for the sheer survival and stability of the entire nation.
Correct.
Well, in ancient Israel, flagrant, violent rebellion against parents was treated with extreme severity. It was actually a capital offense judged by the elders of the city.
Which seems incredibly harsh to modern ears. But if you think about it, the parents were the primary mechanism for transmitting this entire covenant.
Yeah.
If the family unit breaks down, the transmission of these 10 words just stops.
Exactly.
And if the next generation despises their parents, they will despise the covenant, and society itself starts to fracture.
And when society fractures, human life rapidly loses its value, which explains why the very next boundary set is the prohibition of malicious murder. The famous phrase, do not kill.
Let's look closely at that one because it is incredibly famous, but also widely misunderstood.
Right.
The study Bibles provide some major clarification here on the original language, showing it's not just a blanket pacifist statement applying to all taking of life.
Right. The specific Hebrew word used here is ratzak, and it translates specifically to murder. It denotes an unjustified, premeditated, or malicious taking of human life.
So it's very specific.
It's very specific. The sources are clear that this word ratzak was not applied to killing animals for food or sacrifice. It wasn't applied to legitimate warfare. And it wasn't applied to legal executions within their judicial system.
They even had structural nuance built into their laws for accidents.
Yes, the broader legal code of Israel established specific cities of refuge. If a person accidentally caused a death, what we would call involuntary manslaughter today, they could flee to one of these cities to be protected from a victim's family seeking blood revenge.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So the command do not ratzak is specifically about protecting the sanctity of human life from intentional, malicious destruction.
That distinction is incredibly important. So if life is protected, what about the structure holding those lives together? That is where we see the prohibitions against adultery and theft.
Yeah.
I mean, in a newly formed, mobile, tribal nation wandering in the wilderness, these aren't just minor infractions.
No, they are existential threats. Adultery destroys the foundational social unit of the family, which, as we just discussed, is the mechanism for passing on the covenant. And theft in an ancient agrarian or nomadic society, well, that could be a death sentence. If someone steals your livestock or your means of production in the desert, you starve. Protecting marriage and property was essential for creating a community where people could actually trust their neighbors.
And speaking of trust, that brings us to the commandment about false testimony. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Again, this isn't just about telling a little white lie to your friend about liking their new tunic.
Not at all. This specifically condemns lying in formal legal judgments. Ancient societies didn't have forensic science. There was no DNA evidence, no security cameras.
Right, it was just your word.
Exactly. Legal disputes were settled at the city gates based almost entirely on the testimony of witnesses. If you lied in court, you could completely ruin an innocent person. You could have them executed or stripped of their ancestral land. Perjury was a behavior that would completely rot a just society from the inside out.
It all comes down to trust. If the judicial system is built on lies, the community just collapses. So we've walked through these external actions, the labor laws, the protection of life, marriage, property, and truth. But the final commandment does something that no human legal code can possibly do. It moves from regulating external actions to legislating the internal mind.
The prohibition against coveting. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, or his wife, or his servants, or his ox.
It's like the ultimate check engine light in a car. You don't commit the theft or the adultery or the murder unless the covet light has been flashing red in your mind first.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The 10th commandment targets the internal orientation of a person. It acts as the root motivation for all the previous commandments we just discussed. You can perfectly follow the external laws like you haven't stolen a physical object, you haven't murdered anyone. But if your heart is consumed by a bitter desire to possess what belongs to someone else, you are already breaking the covenant. It legislates the unseen.
And honestly, that is terrifying. Because you can hide your actions from a human judge at the city gate, but you cannot hide your thoughts from an all-knowing God. Which brings us to the visceral reaction of the Israelites standing at the base of the mountain. They have just heard these 10 words, and they are absolutely terrified.
Yes, the text says they witnessed the thunder, the lightning, the sounding of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. They trembled and stood at a distance, begging Moses to speak to them instead of God, fearing they would die.
And the study Bibles point out a fascinating psychological connection here. This specific weather phenomena, the intense thunder and the lightning, would have triggered a very specific memory for them, wouldn't it?
It would have viscerally reminded them of the devastating 7th plague of hail in Egypt. The sensory experience was almost identical.
Oh, wow. Like PTSD.
Very much so. They are seeing the very cosmic power that just crushed the greatest empire on Earth now hovering right over their own heads. It is a moment of profound vulnerability.
No wonder they thought they were going to be wiped out. But Moses responds with a profound, almost paradoxical statement. He tells them, "Do not fear," explaining that God has come to test them, so that the fear of God will be with them to keep them from sinning. Wait, do not fear, but also have the fear of God. How do we reconcile that?
It sounds like a contradiction, but Moses is making a crucial theological distinction. He is differentiating between the cowering terror of being destroyed, which he says that they shouldn't have because God just saved them, and a profound, reverent awe of God's holiness.
Okay, reverent awe.
Yes, it is that reverent awe knowing his absolute power, his unyielding justice, and his 1,000-generation mercy that is supposed to act as the internal control valve to keep them from sinning.
That is incredibly deep. Now, after this overwhelming cosmic experience, the passage ends with some highly specific instructions for building altars. And I have to say, reading this part, I was so confused.
It seems a bit out of place at first.
Yeah. After all this thunder and majesty, God says, "Make an altar of earth for me, just dirt. And if you use stone, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it." And finally, no steps going up to the altar.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast it creates with the surrounding ancient world and the specific mechanism of that no steps rule.
Right. Why end this epic treaty with architectural instructions for crude dirt, uncut stone, and keeping your feet on the ground?
Because it proves what God actually values. In the ancient Near East, pagan worship was highly performative and structurally imposing. Think of the massive ziggurats in Mesopotamia or the high places of Canaan.
Oh, those massive towers.
Right. These were heavily engineered platforms that required immense wealth, specialized craftsmen, and forced labor to build. Furthermore, pagan priests often performed rituals on these high, elevated steps, which sometimes involved cultic prostitution or performative dominance, exposing their nakedness as a display of power or fertility.
Oh, wow. So God is looking at that entire system of religious theater and saying, no,
Yeah,
absolutely not.
precisely. By mandating no steps, God institutes a structural mechanism to enforce strict humility and modesty in worship. And by commanding altars of simple earth or unhewn stone, he is saying that human manufacturing, our impressive tools, and our elaborate religious productions actually profane the worship. He prioritizes a genuine, humble relationship over human performance.
And it also mentions that God promises to come and bless them in every place where he causes his name to be remembered, which means his presence is entirely mobile. He isn't tied to a specific local shrine or a singular mountain like a localized pagan deity. He's going to travel with them into the wilderness.
He's the God of the cosmos, not the God of a zip code.
So what does this all mean? To summarize this incredible journey we've been on, we started with a cosmic rescue mission, a king pulling his people from the burning building of slavery.
Yeah.
Then we saw the radical rejection of idols, the command to treat his name with ultimate integrity, and the literal invention of the weekend to ensure that even the lowest members of society were granted dignity and rest.
Such a huge shift.
We moved through laws protecting life, truth, marriage, and property, all the way down to the deepest hidden motives of the human heart, the prohibition of coveting. It turns out these ancient words aren't a restrictive burden at all. They are a blueprint for maintaining freedom and building a society where trust and justice actually work.
They absolutely are. And before we wrap up, this raises an important question, a final puzzle to chew on regarding those altar instructions. Think about the mandate for basic dirt and uncut stones one more time.
Okay.
By commanding that worship be conducted in such an accessible, humble way wherever God's memory was celebrated, did this ancient text effectively democratize worship? Did it intentionally prevent a monopoly by a wealthy, tool-wielding, priestly elite from forming right at the very beginning of the nation? It completely upends the power dynamics of ancient religion.
That is an amazing thought to leave on. The democratization of worship from day one, preventing a religious monopoly before it could even start. I love that. Well, that is all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Exodus 20 and for digging into these sources with us. God blesses all of you, our listeners, and we will catch you on the next one.